Oh, my.
My grandmother used to hold us down in court.
You ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, we'll start off with the council meeting follow-up. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I do not have anything for this evening. I'll wait a follow-up, although I'd certainly be open to any questions or directions otherwise.
Anybody have anything from last meeting? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the cable RFP, Mr. City Manager.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. As you are aware, council authorized staff to open an RFP process for the purpose of soliciting an operator for the city's cable channel 192 that's provided through our franchise agreement with Spectrum. We are at the point now where that window of time has closed. We did have interest expressed by our friends who are here tonight who represent the board for Casper 1. They have withdrawn their interest to respond to the RFP. However, would like an opportunity to take another crack at it and would be desirous of the council to consider opening another window for a response period. And so the question that's really before you tonight, unlike what we initially expected, that we'd have a response to evaluate, is rather whether or not you'd have the temperament to be willing to consider another response process, RFP process. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd certainly be open to questions. Again, we have folks from the board here tonight that could answer your questions as well, however you'd like to go with this topic at this point.
Councilman Gamera.
Thanks. Might be a question best directed for board members. I couldn't recall if I read the rationale for withdrawing the RFP and then wanting to resubmit, so I didn't know if we could get some more information on that.
You go ahead. You're the president.
I'm the
I'll
mouse.
step in.
No, Kyle, what happened is, he assembled us as a board, and we have about 15 people on the board. And I agreed to chair the board and really use my fundraising. As many of you know, I do really well. Being really honest with you, I think that we have a person that wants to do this, that's got the expertise, and what he needs to be a reporter and do that type of thing. Where things fell apart was with the administrative part. And we met with Carter about a month and a half ago to find out what we really should do, Renee Panton-Jones and Mike, Step and I. We didn't step in heavily because we hadn't seen the RFP, but we garnered information. We got some feedback from people on the Casper Chamber website. We have a YouTube. And I mean, Mark does a really good job with all those things, but I, as many of you know, have put together several nonprofits. And what we asked Carter is if you guys would consider letting us as the board take this over. We saw what the RFP was needed for the first time about a week ago. And Mike has been on several boards. We believe in this process. The entire board believes in it. We've been already raising money. We received a check for $8,000 a few weeks ago. And we've got other pledges from people. So what we're asking is that you would give us the opportunity to complete the RFP and give you all the things you need. The final one that was done isn't one that I would ever want to present in any kind of a portion. Does that answer your question, Kyle?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The only thing I'd add is that it's really easy to use COVID as an excuse. That isn't entirely it. But it did slow down our getting charter from the state of Wyoming on the nonprofit corporation. And we've also been slowed down because initially we were meeting by Zoom. It slowed down getting the process done to file with the IRS for the 501c3. We've got the filing for the tax ID number done, and we've got the charter with the state of Wyoming done now for our corporation. So, you know, we're working through things much slower than as a business person, I typically like to see that we'd rather it be done right than done fast. So we've got a lot of good minds, Renee. We've got Rose
Fry,
Fry
Bruce Hinchy,
and Bruce
Rob
Hinchy.
Johnston.
So we've got the ability to raise funds because of the trustworthiness of the people that are representing the board. But it just, we got slowed down and everything is slowed, and we're not comfortable with the presentation that we had to bring. Quite frankly, if it isn't good, I don't want my name on it, so we pulled it out. So that's where we're at. I don't think anybody else wants to do this, but if they did, you know, we wouldn't hesitate to compete or help them, whichever was appropriate. But right now, I still think it's a good idea. I think there are gaps in reporting for Casper, Wyoming, and Natrona County, and particularly in soft stories, what I call soft stories, you know, the people, places, things type of stories that maybe aren't considered hard news, where somebody's hurt or dies. Development of the community and the things that people are doing. With that, I don't know if you have any other questions. That's where we're at.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
I don't have any questions. I just want to say I'm willing to extend that out to you guys again. I know you guys, I know a lot of people on the board. I know your guys' experiences on boards. I understand that. You guys know what it takes for nonprofits. You know what it takes for processes to apply for grants, RFPs, and so you know what that takes. So I think so, and I appreciate the honesty. Appreciate you coming here, you know, and saying, hey, give us a chance, give us a shot. And I know you guys know how to do that right. And so I'm going to be a yes on saying let's move forward and let them have a little bit of time to wrap it up a little bit and make it a little nicer.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks. Councilmember Bullock.
I agree. I still think this is it's a project that we need, and I don't see any pressing time constraint really, since it's not, we got no other submissions, and I am curious if there is I don't know if this is for Carter or for you, if you have a time frame in mind when you'd like to see this reopened, or if we're just going to kind of put it on ice for now until we hear back.
We're going to
No.
keep working, and we'd like to work with Carter on what a timeline would be appropriate for the city staff. We don't, you know, they've already done some work. We don't want to make this project be shoving something else out of the way. I shouldn't say we, I'm speaking for myself there, but I think, you know, I think it would work best to work with Carter and his staff to develop a timeline rather than say we'll do it at X date and then that doesn't work out for us or it doesn't work out for them. So that's where I'm at. I think as long as Carter's amenable to working with us still, working forward together is a whole lot better idea than having us work separately, and certainly a better idea than any kind of possible adversarial relationship. So that's just out of the question. So
I do want to point out that Carter's really been helpful for us, and he's really given us good guidance and suggestions on what to do as well as for. And that's why we wanted to talk to you, because he gave us, I mean, he's met with us several times, Renee, Mike, and myself, and we really do appreciate all the help he's given us and all the guidance.
Councilman Kathy.
I don't mind working with Carter to set up a time frame, but if this is going to be a legitimate RFP, we still have to come up with a definite opening time and a closing date, so that everybody else, it can be advertised and everything else just.
yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things we have to work out.
Okay.
Obviously, there's legal parameters that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And we
They-
understand
they
that
got-
Carter
they got
wants to
some-
deal with this, and he said, do you want to continue with this RFP the way it is? I personally didn't want my name on it,
Okay.
and Mike didn't want his, and
Now,
Renee.
you're talking about the submittal to us, not
Yeah,
the
Carter
RFP
submittal.
going out.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So we're, whatever. And you know, I mean, you're just coming off, you're still in the middle of developing budget, starting a new year. I know you got a lot of things across the summer, where the rest of us are trying to take it easy. You guys are all geared up, so we want to be able to work within that too. So.
Okay, anybody else with anything? We good, moving forward? Okay. Sounds good.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you.
you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Carter will get in touch with you.
Yes, ma'am. You betcha. You betcha.
All right, we will move on to the DEA grant. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Pursuant to your request, this is the opportunity that you have to review the data associated with the grant that the police department had obtained through the DEA. Heck, was approved sometime earlier in the year, yeah. So this is that opportunity to see what data the police have organized around the response that these dollars facilitated, and certainly your opportunity to ask questions and dig in and see what other direction that you might have pursuant to what you hear tonight. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if I could turn the time to the chief, I'd sure appreciate it.
Okay, Chief?
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to report back to you. I have a PowerPoint presentation, but I need to declare right up in front. It's got a lot of narrative in there. It's not intended for me to speak from that narrative, nor is it intended for you to read along with that narrative. I've actually changed the order of the slides, but we put that extensive narrative in there to give, more information to our partners in the press, so that they had a better feel for what these things were. So please don't get lost in the slides. So I'd ask you to kind of ponder what is the reality of how law enforcement works. How do we make arrests? How do we stop crimes from happening? What is the nature of that? And indeed, we get called. People pick up the phone 911 and say there's a crime happening right now, and we go to that. But when it comes to us self-initiating that activity and stopping that crime, we have to be able to proactively go about doing that. And one of the ways that we do that is through purpose-driven law enforcement techniques, and traffic stops figure very heavily in that. So when we see a traffic violation that's happening, that gives us an opportunity to lawfully talk to somebody, to determine for ourselves, hey, is this somebody that can be, we can educate them and change their driving behavior, or is this a hardened person that's got 42 citations already and they've proven that they don't care? And at the same time, while we're talking to them, we can't help but notice the back seat filled with stolen property. Hey, sometimes we're on a first name basis with them. Explain to me why all those clothes have got the tags on them still, but no bags and no receipt. So one of so back in 2019, the police department embraced and adopted the DDAX method, and that's data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety. It's a national program, and it is nationally recognized as the best way to prevent and reduce crime without adversely impacting, say, a community of color or something like that. So it's done specifically. We're here not because we're picking on this neighborhood. We're here because the data shows that this intersection is high in traffic crashes, and it's also high in reported crimes. And so we map and generate all of that, and that's how we determine how to allocate our resources. So many of you probably remember that back in the late summer and early fall, Poplar and CY was on our radar. And if you remember the report that I gave to council, Poplar and CY was one of our top 10 intersections for crashes. And so so we dedicated officers through the DDAX program to that intersection to help reduce those crashes, but also to have an impact on crime in that area. So DDAX is, so basically it's an overlapping of where do you have crime and where do you have traffic crashes, that's where you need to go. So it's tantamount to if you're going to go catch a 28-inch German Brown, yes, you can try down here at the bridge over here, or you can go to the Miracle Mile. Where are you going to go? So I think most of us would not pay a guide to take us to the bridge. Most of us would pay a guide to take us to the Miracle Mile because that's where the fishing is good. And so DDAX is really that simplified concept of you need to put your police officers where they're going to do the best good. So on a day-to-day basis, this is what officers do. They respond to crime and they investigate and they document crime that's already occurred. When they are not doing that, they have unobligated time, and we expect them to go out and prevent crime. And the primary way that they do that is through traffic stops. During that traffic stop, that develops into other things, one of which is we educate and inform and let people go with a warning because we think we've changed their driving behavior. Other things develop, hey, it really smells like there's 42 pounds of methamphetamine in your car. We need to talk about that. That's how police work works. And so when we're doing these on a day-to-day basis, if you look at the persons that are arrested, and they're arrested for a variety of crimes, the vast majority of those happen at the scene of a traffic stop. That's kind of the nature of police work. Any questions on DDAX? So for us to do that self-initiated activity, we really need to have that unobligated time. And here recently, calls for police services are up, traffic stops are up 54%. Because things are heating up this summer, no pun intended. We're busy, and so if we're going to do crime prevention, we need to have that unobligated time. So one of the things that's really helpful for us is when we have these grants, they're state and federal grants that we receive that helps us do that. And what these grants do is they allow us to put officers on full time doing that grant operation, during which they don't have to respond to the stolen bicycle and the runaway or the domestic violence and things like. Other officers are covering that just like we do day in and day out. These officers now are freed up to just concentrate on those public safety things. And so that's what we do. And that's why these grants are so helpful for us, is it creates that unobligated time when they're not beholden to the radio sending them somewhere. They can go out and actually work on crime prevention. And so it pays that overtime for us to do that. So for this particular case, we have dedicated a lot of effort to how we go about this. And so when we receive these grants, we tailor the needs of our community to the grants that are available to us. But in almost every case, it allows for us to get boots on the ground, police officers out there with unobligated time to do that. And every one of these grants is tailored to what does our community need. So in this particular case, the DEA grant doesn't require us to just go out and try to find people smoking marijuana in the bushes. That's not what it requires us to do. It requires us to provides the resources for us to put together something that's intended to help reduce some of the crime-causing things in our city. So in this particular case, we took our DDAX areas, one of which, if you remember, one of our worst intersections was coming in on CY Avenue when you get to the turnoff to go into Walmart, and Wolf Creek just before that, and then Wyoming Boulevard. It's one of our worst areas, and so we were able to get these officers on that unobligated time, something that's tailored to reduce crashes, to reduce crime, to make sure that the criminals in our community are kind of aware, hey, they're out, they're serious, and there's lots of them, and they're getting the job done. When you're driving by and you see, there's a police car over there with somebody pulled over, and there's a police car over there with somebody pulled over, and that one's got somebody, and they're arresting and searching the car. That makes you go, I wonder what's going on, but for sure I'm not going to run that red light, and hey, how fast am I going? It has a very good calming effect on the occurrence of crime. So DDAX is nationally recognized. When we do these things, that visible impact has a demonstrative effect on reducing crime. So this isn't just about reducing, or the title of the grant was the domestic eradication of marijuana, and that got a whole conversation going in our public. But the actual implementation of it is accomplishing our public safety goals. It's the same thing we do every day. It's just doing it in a concentrated effort and doing so with somebody else paying the bills to do that. So our community benefits in reduced traffic crashes and reduced, we send a clear message to the drug traffickers. It shouldn't be lost on us. And when we get to the slide with the map here in a few, things have changed here recently. So the technology and the resources available to our partners to the south of us has changed, and so drug traffickers are altering their trade routes, and those trade routes now are skipping the state to our southern border. They're trying to avoid that like the plague. So just in the last little while, we've had some amazing things that you just don't get to hear about that often. For example, one of our canine officers assisted one of our local agencies with discovering 79 pounds of methamphetamine. That's not a small thing. So this is kind of an overlay of not only this grant, but all of the grants. And remember that the functional reality of these grants is essentially the same thing. So in February, we did one through traffic safety for DUI and occupant protection. We were able to, there was traffic stops made, there was, citations were issued, and arrests were made. And that's unobligated time that allows us to go out and do those things. And, we don't enforce traffic violations to make money. It's not the people always say that, they must need to fill the coffers. That's not the case. We're trying to reduce the harm that comes from traffic crashes in our community. There was another one in March, 286, with 5 arrests. And so that's just the way we do business. This one, the one that I'm reporting back to you guys, had 381 traffic stops. Several citations were issued, but there were 23 arrests on that. So pretty effective. Of the drugs that were seized, 520 grams of marijuana, and it's, there's been some people, it was just a pound of marijuana. Well, it's different when you hold that up in a bag, wow, that's off the street. 67 grams of methamphetamine and 1 gram of cocaine. One of the traffic stops that originated through that was found to have hard illicit drugs concealed in the trunk. And when we interrogated the driver, I was acting as the mule transport to take those drugs to Chicago. That's evidence of the shifting of the transportation routes. Or now Casper is now receiving drugs that we didn't normally have. In the last week, we've had MDMA, ecstasy, all of these different drugs that are showing up because now all of a sudden we're on the traffic route as they avoid other routes. In April, we did one through NHTSA, 97 traffic stops, 6 DUI arrests, a bunch of citations. So this is the nature of the work. In this particular case, it's important for me to point out that, and one of our officers was the author of this operation. And yes, our Casper police officers were paid, their time was paid for by this grant. But that officer of his own initiative was recognizing the fact that not all criminals live within Casper. Many of them live in the outlying areas, but they come to Casper. Our borders are not necessarily respected. I can only commit crimes in this town or this city. So that officer of his own volition was able to reach out to our partnering agencies, and at no cost to the grant and at no cost to us, got a larger group in there. It included 5 from Evansville, 3 from Mills, 5 from the Highway Patrol, and Natrona County deputies also. So in one fell swoop, it was a force multiplier for the 0 expenses to the city. we had a large contingency out there, and remember the goal of this is to reduce traffic crashes, to increase public safety, and to send a message to the criminals. Casper is not the place to do your business. And so remember, and many of you do remember, the dialogue that was going on social media. Holy cow, what is going on? The cops are stopping everybody, countywide. And that was the effectiveness of this program, that our own officer authored that, organized that large group, so that we could make that statement throughout Natrona County. It was very effective, and when you look at the results of it, 381 traffic stops. Those are pretty good fishing odds. That's fishing in the Miracle Mile. I just to emphasize that point, as these traffic routes have changed through I-70, the trafficking routes have changed through I-70. That has now shifted. It's going up I-15 and coming over through non-interstate routes, and so that's why we're actually interviewing the people, and they're telling us, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. We're trying to avoid that. So Casper here in Natrona County is recognized as a HIDA agency, meaning it's an area that needs help, and we want to be able to take advantage of it. And so this particular DEA grant is very helpful to us to achieve these goals that we all want. It helps reduce crime, helps reduce the cost of living, and it improves the quality of life in our community. On a local consideration here recently, we've had some marijuana trafficking related investigations. They've been fairly notable, but without a doubt, what we found while we were doing those investigations is that those same organizations were also trafficking in our stolen guns. And so, harmless thing, there is oftentimes serious crimes associated with it. And again, I can't emphasize enough, the ones that we're finding that they're using our city to travel through. Questions on HIDA? So, we had this listed for 30 minutes, but really the message you're hearing from me is this is the work that we do day in and day out. We identify a citizen most often through traffic violations. We communicate with them. If it's somebody that can be educated, that we can engage with, that we can partner with to reach our public safety goals, we're absolutely 100% okay with, hey, can I explain to you why this is important that you don't drive, why you don't turn left in front of oncoming traffic. If we get the impression that they don't, that is going to suffice, that we've impacted them. I mean, boy, some of those you can tell. They're just mortified. It's the first time they've been pulled over in 40 years. And we check their driving history, and it's good. But the other ones that we pull them over and we recognize them because we've arrested them 17 times this year. That's a different conversation. That's when we're more inquisitive. We're more likely to get involved with it. These grants, be it however they originate, that's what they allow us to do. The partnership that we have with the DEA is a growing and expanding partnership, and I just want to. So we've dedicated now 2 task force officers to the DEA, and they're doing amazing work. And so that partnership with the DEA is what brought in some of this funding, but it also brings in these other resources that we have need of. So here this week we came across a large quantity of what we were led to believe was OxyContin, very addictive, very dangerous drug, large quantity of trafficking of this drug. And the problem is that now it's usually not OxyContin, it's fentanyl or carfentanil, because it's so much cheaper to produce that and market it as OxyContin. And so in situations like that, it's imperative. We don't, we got to be very careful. Just touching it is enough to cause serious problems for us. So that's a classic example of one of the benefits is we have access to and funding for that critical safety equipment that we need to get those drug identifiers out in the street to help protect our officers so they're not accidentally overdosing. This cooperative relationship allows us to work hand in hand jointly with the United States Attorney's Office as we prosecute and identify the ones that are not only causing problems here but causing problems elsewhere. And the benefit to us is if through this cooperative relationship, when they're sentenced and tried in court, found guilty and sentenced to prison, if we do that on a local basis, then we're on the hook for those taxpayer dollars going to pay for those prison terms. Through the United States Attorney's Office, that's done through the federal system, and our citizens are not paying for that incarceration of those hardened offenders. One of the things that's a huge benefit to us is if today, for example, theorize with me, that we stopped a vehicle and we found that large quantity of narcotics and also that large quantity of cash. Right now, without these cooperative arrangements, then that would be investigated by DCI, and there'd be a thing taken off the top, and then the rest of us would kind of share in whatever little bit was left over. Versus when we work with the DEA in these partnerships, it's an 80% return on that. The 20% that's left over doesn't even go into their stuff. It helps to pay for the processing costs and things like that. So those opportunities for this to be financially viable for us is there, especially with this recently changed drug trafficking routes. The access to the intelligence and the data and the equipment resources is way beyond our ability, and so that's another benefit. And then the last thing is the career and skill development that we get our employees when they get involved in these cases. They make better supervisors, they make better managers, and hopefully one day make a better chief of police. There are a lot of advantages to this. My recommendation, as I watch this unfold, we all seem to, myself included, kept getting involved into discussion over the aspect of marijuana and eradication in the title, when in fact this is a grant that helps us put boots on the ground to accomplish our traffic safety goals, our public safety goals, our quality of life goals, and our cost of living goals. And with that, I would answer any questions.
Councilwoman Ingebretson.
I have, I guess, two. If marijuana got legalized, say in the state next year, would this grant still be available? And then also, is there a task force looking at like human trafficking issues?
Mayor, Councilwoman, let me try to answer those. So if the state were to legalize marijuana, we would still have an ongoing relationship with the DEA. I'm not sure that they would choose that particular grant to work with us, but under the timeframes of this grant, we would continue to work this grant until it was over. I'm not really sure that they would choose to renew that. This is one that we acquired last year, but because of COVID, everything shut down and it got delayed, and that money got delayed. But in addition to it is the equipment needs that we have also. So I would bet that they would probably change their tune a little bit. When it comes to human trafficking, I don't have a grant right now. I've not been presented with an opportunity to have a grant working specifically on human trafficking, but that's just something that we address. We put our port team to use on that, and through consultation with some of our citizens, we're looking at a couple cases right now, putting together that case.
Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. Just a couple. I have a few questions, but if you could go back a couple slides. Yep, to that one. First question is under funds used. Is that a typo, or how much?
Where are we at?
In the middle one.
Funds used.
Yep, this is funds used. Yep.
Yeah, $10,000.
Okay, so what happened to or is the grant still ongoing, or what happens to the rest?
It's absolutely ongoing.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
This was just a one-time use of. In all of these cases,
Right.
we.
Like, all those are like within a couple $100 with those.
Sure, but this one we still have until, the federal year,
Okay.
October 1, I think.
And then I understand that these
Sorry
are.
for the typo.
No, you're fine. I was just curious where the rest of the funding is at. I forgot where I was going.Hold on. Give me a second. Okay. So if you look at the other grants, they're for traffic safety, traffic safety, traffic safety. I understand the grants can be used for the broad spectrum of crime. It's just an oddly specific thing to name this grant. I mean, I don't know. I know we don't have any control over that. It's federal government. But I guess more of my questions come in like, how was it executed? So the traffic stops are 381 traffic stops, which is probably more than what we typically do, right? In that time frame.
In a 2-day period,
Mhm.
yes. Last week we did 380 traffic stops.
Okay. And so were all those stops, I guess, stops based off of traffic violations, or were there like random stops, or?
No, okay, thank you. Mayor, great question. This is something that we do every day. Those are based upon traffic violations. This is the nature of police work. When we are not responding to something, this is what we want our officers doing. And so in this case, there was no profiling done. There was, but we did put those officers. We strategically located them in our areas of high impact that we wanted to have an impact on. So CY and Wolf Creek area was one of the areas, and that happens to be coming into town from one of these highways that we know is one of the new routes. And so we were being strategic about it, but there was no profiling, no random stops whatsoever. These were all 100% traffic violations. Many of those resulted in a, hey, how's it going? The reason why we're stopping you today is we've had a lot of crashes at this intersection. People are failing to yield and give right of way to oncoming traffic. That's exactly what you did. We're trying to cut down on those crashes. Can you partner with us? Can you go back and tell everybody we're here, we're making this stop, we're trying to reduce this? And if you'll agree to that, would you accept a warning today? And most people go, that makes perfect sense to me. And so that's the vast majority of it. So everyone was a law violation. The officer still had discretion as to, okay, who am I dealing with? Is this somebody who needs the full benefit of our attention? Or is this somebody that we invite to partner with us?
And then one more, if I may.
Okay.
How many searches were performed out of those, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay, and then, I guess, how are those searches chosen? Were they asking people, were they consensual searches, or were there other extenuating circumstances?
So the term search is a legal term.
Right.
And the Fourth Amendment guarantees our citizens the right to be free from searches without warrant. And so when you use the term search, that involves a whole other, so one of the exceptions to that is we can ask people, hey, I see, the common thing that we find is there's two people in the car, and we ask one, where are you coming from? And they say Salt Lake, and you ask the other one, and he says Fresno. Where are you going to? One says Chicago, one says Baltimore. So that starts making us want to ask them, would you mind if we search that? We have a very effective canine program here. We have outstanding dogs. You may not know this, but we took Top Dog Award again, perennially. We take, our dogs are highly trained, and so when the officers start thinking things aren't adding up, it's not unusual for the dog to show up and do their thing just in the background without, completely unobtrusive. And so searches would have been conducted on this, to obtain those, but that's done through a very systematic way. We just can't pull you over and search your car. We don't get to randomly pull people over and see if you'll volunteer for a search. Those are all violations of civil rights, and so it's done through a very, very practiced and very controlled way.
That's all I have.
Okay. You should ask that question. Councilman Gamert.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chief, for the presentation, for all the great information. piggybacking on a little bit what Councilman Johnson said, I think kind of what he was getting at, I'm somebody that looks for patterns, and so it did stick out to me that the first operation was about 93 stops, half resulting in speeding tickets, other half in warnings. The March, same, half speeding tickets, half warnings. The last one, there was actually more warnings than there were stops, so that one confused me a little bit, but still about half resulted in speeding. And I noticed the March one, March 29, 30, the DEA one, was only a quarter of those resulted in speeding violations, and the proportion of warnings was much more. And so thank you for acknowledging that there was no profile or anything, but I was wondering if you could speak to
Absolutely.
the environmental variables.
These are going to be 1 and 2 officers at a time over a period of some days. Same thing. We got 4 openings. We got 4 cops out there, and you can see that they're pretty dang busy. This one was unique when we had, I'm going from memory, but I want to say there was 24 officers out there all in one fell swoop. That's why this one is so different. Now, when it comes to warnings versus citations, I don't control Evansville police officers. I don't control Mills police officers and Wyoming Highway Patrol. I have expectations of my officers, but we gathered that data, we reported the results, but everybody was having that same script. Here's why we're out here, and here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to reduce these crashes, trying to increase public safety. And it is possible to have more warnings because oftentimes there are more violations. I pull you over for speeding, but you also don't have insurance, or your passenger's got a problem, things of that nature. So it is possible to do. Remember, our goal is to change behavior. We just want to change behavior. If we can accomplish that through education, then the goal is accomplished. If we have to engage in more like fines and citations to change that behavior, we're willing to do that also. The citizen is the one driving that train. So if they're amenable to the warning, they get warnings. If they're not amenable to the warning and proven a history of that doesn't mean anything to me, then citations and when appropriate arrests are more feasible.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
So Chief, Councilman Johnson kind of brought this up a little bit, and I was having a side conversation with the mayor. So if someone, you do pull someone over and they sit and say, you have some suspicion, their stories aren't collaborating, you have some ideas, and you say, can I search your car? And they say, no, you can't search. Is that, at that point, you have to be like, okay, you can go on your way?
So again, I don't want to get down into the nitty-gritty of tactics and the methodology by which we do our job. That is not the intent of this. So people are freed from searches without warrant. And our officers live and work and play in that arena all day, every day of their careers. So they're very astute on, so when we have no legal reason to search, we can't search. And when we have no legal reason to detain, we don't detain. That's just the facts. And so, but you have a very effective law enforcement agency. Our officers are pretty highly trained and they're pretty effective at the job that they do. We don't trick people. We work within the confines of the law and the Constitution to achieve these public safety goals. And so if we get to the point where we're randomly stopping people and searching them without warrant, where you're going to have far greater concerns than the conversation over the poor title of this grant. But the title of the grant notwithstanding, we cherish the relationship that we have with our federal partners, and we welcome these additional resources because it helps us reduce crime in our city. And free time of the officers, that's the end-all be-all of crime prevention. The officers got to have free time for us to go out and prevent crime, which is completely different from going and documenting the crime that's already happened.
And I think and I'm not asking that question, Chief, and I don't think you took it this way, to be like, I got you, that you're trying to do that.
No.
For me, it's also pointing out you guys have a very hard job, I think. in the sense of, you know, trying to balance all of that as well, because it's not easy when you do a traffic stop and you're trying to do that because you're worried about your safety, you're worried about multiple things going on. And so, and I know that it's not easy to have to balance that, your officers to do that. And so I'm sure it's not easy. So that was the reason I asked, and for clarification for myself, so.
Thank you.
You bet.
Councilman McCaskill.
If I read the report right here and everything, basically this is funding overtime pay, because that's how you get the officers free, and that's why you still have the staff to cover normal day-to-day operations. Did I read that part right in here?
Mayor, Councilman, excellent point. You know, if I failed to make that clear, that's exactly how this works. Right now, we're working a very heinous violent crime with a firearm. So every officer I've got right now, they're dedicated to that. We are trying to apprehend a person right now as we speak. That means no cops are available to work on these other public safety things. But if at the same time I have people out on grant funding, they are called in on overtime, and they are now free from responding to those things. They get to dedicate their time solely to crime prevention.
As a follow-up, is that voluntary or is that quasi-mandatory, the overtime?
We
Just curious.
You know, it's voluntary overtime, and you know
Okay.
your police department. As a council, you'll hear me say this often. You should be proud of your police department. They're working hard right now, and the officers are. There's a little bit of fatigue starting to kick in because we had this period of time during COVID when criminals didn't stop being criminals. And now you have those same criminals who have not stopped being criminals, but now the rest of society is kind of rolled up their sleeves and said, woohoo, summer's here. We're tired of being in the home, and my favorite watering hole has been closed for a long time, and so we're really busy right now. And so it's always voluntary, and rare is the occasion when it's absolutely critical, and we'll pick the junior guy and make him come in. Sorry, we're gonna have to do, but that's extremely rare. Probably doesn't happen once every few years. You don't want an officer that has to be there. You want officers that want to be there.
Yep.
When it comes to crime prevention stuff.
That was why I was asking. Yeah. And the reason I chuckled when you mentioned that everybody was in a deal, I think I know where that was. So you kind of answered another question. So, yeah.
Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you for this presentation and the information. I think the thing that's interesting me most right now is this DDACS process that's being used, because I do think that the data is really important, and I'm wondering how will we, the secondary question that I think leads to one question, I hope, if I manage this properly. When we think about metrics of how we measure, like, are we really improving community safety? I'm interested. I have a hard time reckoning with the idea that putting more people in jail, like, necessarily results in a safer community and a healthier community. I also understand that taking 67 grams of meth off the street likely does. So I'm not suggesting that this doesn't necessarily result in a safer community, but I'm wondering, how will we know? And when will we know? When will we know that DDACS is the right approach for us to be taking? It says 2019, so I imagine we don't have any good data yet. If 2020, just is implemented, and then we've got 2020. So when, in your mind, when will we know that, in fact, this has reduced crime and traffic crashes in our community, and how, what metrics make most sense to you for how we measure if we're truly safer and healthier the community?
Mayor, councilperson, excellent questions. DDACS it's been studied now ad nauseum. The list of communities that have adopted it and shown demonstrative reductions in their Part 1 crimes and their overall crime, they're huge. They're, statistically, it's off the chart. There's no other No other crime prevention method that I'm even remotely aware of that is more effective than DDAX. So it takes a while for DDAX to mature as a program. Our department, you know, is still trying to embrace, how does DDAX work? How does it work for not the guys that are on overtime, but the ones that are here on. So how it works for us right now, council person, is that we put a lot of time and resources in identifying on the map where's this overlap of crime and traffic crashes. Those are things that we can work on, and we can sink our teeth in that. It's harder for me to address poverty or, you know, other things, but these are ones that we can address. So we use our data to identify the areas where the highest number of crashes are happening and the highest percentage of serious crimes are happening. And then we draw a box around it. So in this case, just last month, we identified the area down in our downtown area where we were having, so from on 2nd Street, from 1st to 3rd Street, but focusing on 2nd Street, from Jackson to David Street, when officers were free from taking calls and responding to crime, we sent them into that area to do traffic stops. Now that doesn't mean that, you know, you didn't see us down there in hordes, but you would have seen more traffic stops down there. So during that time period, just as an officer, hey, I've got free time now, they get on the radio, Sarge, can I head down to the DDAX area where we've identified this one? And they say, yeah, go for it. And so out of 46 traffic stops, we found 4 people with arrest warrants. We had one person that was on a suspended license from a DUI, driving without their interlock, and we made two. You know, so you kind of see the fruition of what the sense that makes on this is that that overlapping map of crime and traffic crashes really starts to pay dividends. So a year ago, CY and Poplar was a huge problem. You know, the traffic crashes were abundant and frequent. We hit it hard, and immediately CY and Poplar dropped off our top offender intersections. So you can see immediate results, but over time is where you start seeing that reduction in Part 1 crimes and other, violent crimes, things of that nature. So what we found, I'm sorry, you've got me on my soapbox now. The mayor's given me the, you're taking too long. Like DDAX doesn't do anything for us for domestic violence, because that's not a roadway related thing. So there's some crimes I'm not going to impact, but when it comes to assaults, vandalism, robberies, aggravated assaults, things like that, DDAX has been proven. Statistically, I defy anybody to find me studies that don't show, holy cow, most effective thing we've ever done. So those things that are associated with criminals traveling to and from a crime, traffic crashes, in those high crime-ridden areas, DDAX is the most effective program out there. We like it because it's non-disparate. We don't, people don't, we get to tell them, hey, I didn't stop you because you were a person of color. Because sometimes people will assume that, or because I'm female, or because I'm poor. I've heard it all in my 30-year career. Because I'm Catholic, because I, fill in the blanks. DDAX is non-discriminatory. We identify an area based upon this concrete data, and try to reduce. And so while we're reducing the crashes, it has an impact on the crime. Criminals are uncomfortable driving through an area that's got 4 cop cars in it with people pulled over. That makes them nervous. And so it's, we may displace them, but after, a percentage of them are like, man, this is like playing Russian roulette. Driving through here, I'm just not gonna, I'm gonna change my behavior. And that's why DDAX is effective.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you again, Chief. I'm not familiar with DDAX, but as somebody familiar with research and stuff, I do know certainty of being caught committing a crime is one of the strongest deterrents, although severity of the consequence isn't. And so this is outside kind of our conversation and outside kind of your jurisdiction. I totally understand the methodology you're using, and I think we have an amazing police department here that does awesome work and super accessible to the community. To Councilman Johnson's point about the name of the grant, I don't think from an optics perspective, as somebody working in marketing communications, that did us any favors. As somebody, again, who stands for economic development, a community attractiveness, trying to recruit people to live and work here, I don't think it did us any favors. But I do wish our state as a whole, our state legislature, and just kind of the culture of our state would move towards a more public health approach to treating personal use and possession of drugs. Over half the people in Wyoming prisons are there for revocation of their probation or parole. The vast majority of which simply fail the UA. Since 1980, I think we're putting people over twice per capita in prison compared to 1980 for 2.5 times as long. And the United States as a whole has 2 million incarcerated individuals, highest percentage on the planet, 25% of the world's prisoners, 5% of the world's population. So to Councilwoman Johnson, Pollock's point earlier about the metrics, how will we know if it's working? Not speaking to DDAX specifically, but as far as the war on drugs in general, I think it's clear it hasn't worked. As I just mentioned, we're putting twice as many people in Wyoming, at least in prison, as we were in 1980 for over 2.5 times as long. And last I checked, not to say that your officers aren't doing amazing work, but last I checked, meth-related crime had tripled since 2010. And so I just wonder, this hardline, criminal, punitive approach, we've been doing it for decades, and the metrics don't seem to indicate success. And so I just wish we as a society, state, country, would go about this issue a little bit differently. But I appreciate the good work of your officers, your department. I think you all are amazing. Just a philosophical disagreement, I suppose, on this one issue, but thank you. No questions. Just, I saw you up on your soapbox. I thought I'd bump mine up next to it. And
Mayor, thank you.
If I was wrong on
rebuttal
meth-related crime,
a
though.
little bit.
Yeah, please.
When you say meth-related crime does extol the virtues of the fact that these people that are victims are suffering from addictive substances. Had to choose my words
Sure.
there.
Person-centered language, I appreciate it.
As they're going through the throes of their addiction, their willingness to commit crimes on their loved ones and their strangers and our community members is, their tolerance levels are extremely low. And so, on a philosophical basis, I would tell you that, we pay a hefty price here in Casper when it comes to our violent crime and our homicides. They're very, very frequently related to drug abuse.
The majority of which are alcohol, correct?
Well, alcohol is a problem, but
Yeah.
I want to not get myself in trouble here. Look at even the major critical events my officers have been involved in. What's the underlying principle? Oftentimes is substance abuse. Led to that highly focused scrutiny on our local police department. So the impact of drug trafficking in our community is high. That impacts our quality of life. It impacts how people perceive our community. It impacts our cost of living. And your police department is dedicated to improving all of those areas. We think we can make, so some people, and we have significant resources available to people to help them change from their lifestyle and introduce them into healthier, more financially rewarding, more long-term benefits. We have a lot of those, and you're right that the underlying, oftentimes people are in prison because they have failed on all of our rehabilitative attempts, and it may be the technicality of they tested positive yet again, but generally speaking it's for the 50th time, and while we were there we recovered the stolen firearm and the stolen property and all those other things. But it's cleaner and easier to just revoke them on the thing they got rather than going to trial all over again and starting that process all over again. So I don't want to engage in an argumentative philosophical debate. The impact of drugs in our community is higher. We're paying a higher price than we want to be. Your police department is dedicated to improving our quality of life, and making this the safe, wonderful community that we enjoy, where people want to live, work, and play here. We're dedicated to keeping it that way. This DEA partnership that provided us these funds is one of the tools that we have at our disposal. But functionally, the boots on the ground, it was no different from our DUI grant, and it was just no different. It was a different time of the day. Because we didn't need to concentrate on DUI drivers. But the functional thing is, officers, unobligated time, go try to prevent crimes instead of responding to crimes. And while you're there, we partner with our community members that want to be partnered with, and we encourage those that don't want to be partners to change their behavior. If you're gonna keep up, I'm gonna be quiet stuff. I'm gonna quit talking.
The next soapbox has nothing to do with you. No. My turn.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, man. Just one more small soapbox again.
Sleepers
Appreciate you. I know we're ready to move on, but this is just something I'm super passionate about. Used to work at Central Wyoming Counseling Center. It's a 90-day substance abuse rehabilitation center, and the surveys we used to do of our clients up there corroborated national surveys, which show that over 3/4 of people that suffer from a substance abuse disorder have underlying mental health illness or have childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences. And so we've heard Superintendent Jaylene Belo was here speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't remember if it came up in that conversation, but about the 20% cut to the community, the block grant from the Department of Health to go to community mental health services. So again, just recognizing that these issues that that you're grappling with on the criminal justice side of things, people that are getting into that trouble that you're interacting with, I would imagine oftentimes have underlying mental health issues and childhood trauma that I, again, hope we could address and be a little more proactive and preventative about, as opposed to letting them grow up and keeping them in jail. Thank you.
Chief?
And I just want to corroborate exactly what you just said. For those of you who are not familiar with the ACEs study, that adverse childhood experience thing, that is the reason why your police departments are a reason for being, is because of what we're learning now through scientifically validated research on the lifelong impacts of that. And so that's why we work so hard with families. We do so many outreaches to families, because helping those children avoid those adverse childhood experiences, is going to pay dividends that you and I are never going to see, but Casper will feel those effects for generations. So, we try to stay on top of as a department management, we stay on top of these things, and we focus our efforts where they need to be.
Thank you. And I've taken part in crisis intervention training that you at least used to do in partnership with the Central Wyoming Counseling Center, and so I appreciated the department's willingness to go through those trainings and educate their officers. Thank you.
Councilman Johnson.
Just another comment. I brought this up not to have a philosophical debate on the war on drugs, which I align with Kyle more than probably anybody else, but it's more of a, doing my part, my job as a member of the legislative branch of government is for checks and balances. You got to make sure that we're balancing civil rights with crime prevention, because, although Fourth Amendment is lived and breathed by cops every day, it is also the most violated civil right in the United States. It costs municipalities, states, and counties hundreds of billions of dollars every year. So I just want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing on that side of things, by us doing our job on our side of things. It's strictly transparency for me.
Chief, can you go forward a couple slides? Next one. Yeah, that one right there. So the only thing I want to really kind of point out is that if you look at it, I think in a way we kind of get wrapped around the axles about what something's named as far as cannabis eradication, when the reality behind it is every one of those up there are a grant that are given to our law enforcement officers to go out and tackle crime and take care of things. And a lot of the things that you see up there, 6 warrant-related arrests. Why is there a warrant out? Well, 9 times out of 10 it's because somebody didn't show up in court when they're supposed to. Somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do. And so they have a warrant for their arrest, and they have a warrant because they're not walking through the door saying, I'm a bad guy and I should go to jail. They're saying, come find me. So this money goes towards helping our officers do their job, and it goes towards taking people off the street that at some point in time did things that require them to be removed from the street. But if we're gonna sit and look at something because it's named cannabis, and we see where the world's going today, and a lot of states have approved the use of marijuana, and maybe every state will end up being that way. I'm sure if that ends up happening, then DEA will probably change the name on that to something else. It's gonna be a stoplight violation grant or whatever it might be. But the moment we sit there and look at something like that and say, no, we don't like the word cannabis in there, so maybe we shouldn't use that one. Well, all these other grants over here that you're looking at that are used, the opportunity of somebody running into someone that has marijuana in their vehicle, that the officers are gonna have to deal with is out there. So knowing that that opportunity is out there, that somebody's gonna come in contact with somebody that might have some marijuana in their car, do we get rid of that grant? And do we not use any of these grants that are offered to us? If we start doing that, we start doing a thing called defunding the police. And that's the wrong way to go. These funds are set up to help these officers do their job. And so, me personally, I'm gonna look beyond what it says on there. If it were illegal, or if it were legal to have marijuana, then that grant would be named something else, and it wouldn't be a big deal. So there's my soapbox, and I'm gonna get off of it, but those
Why not call
grants are there
something
for a
else?
reason. Call it something else.
It's just an
If I worked for
specific
DEA and
name.
I was at the top, I'd say, hey, we ought to change the name of it.
Yeah.
So Mayor, if I, thank you for just one last comment. I just want to support what the mayor just said. The thing that these grants and the others that are not listed on this page, they accomplish one thing that should mean a lot to this group right here, and certainly to my boss. This keeps me from coming to you guys and saying, okay, I need 24 more cops to accomplish these goals. And that's a significant cost to it. That's a budgetary hit, and you can see he's grimacing right now. Just thinking about it. You know, so this keeps our FTE numbers down, keeps the cost of the city down, but it multiplies the force of officers available out there to prevent crime. These grants are a cost savings in more ways than just this. It keeps us from coming to you and saying, we're not reaching our public safety goals, we need more officers. And so that has a tangible impact. Our success on these grants makes them go, Casper's very good at this, let's give them more money. Which the benefits this year, our traffic safety grants are significantly higher, and it's recognition because Casper accomplishes the stated goals with those monies. So because of our efficiency and the planning that we put into it to accomplish the appropriate goals, that's being rewarded with these funding opportunities. So it's a sign of trust and respect and faith in your Casper Police Department that helps cut our overall costs.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Councilman Captain.
What that does is there's roughly $55,000, $60,000 sitting up there that we didn't have to come up with out of our 1 cent money that we were able to go ahead and use on streets. Now I realize it only got 5 foot of curb, but basically, and I have to agree with the mayor that, yeah, just because of a name, we can't turn the money down. We need to be using it to support our police.
I don't know, I bet if it was named something really ridiculous.
It could have been the eradication of meth, and nobody would have said a word, but for some reason they chose cannabis.
So it's called puppy eradication, would you have voted for it?
Called what?
Nothing. Go.
As long as it was chickens, yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right,
Yes, sir.
let's move on.
Inside joke for us old.
Liquor ordinance changes and limo exemption. Mr. Sidney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. You will see that a lot of what is being discussed tonight with this particular item is really centered around the notion that we need to keep pace with the changing language in the state's legislation in order to be consistent and concurrent with what they are doing. as you are all aware, the state sets the minimum by which we are to follow, and as you probably picked up in your reading of this proposed legislation, the city has the opportunity to up the ante if the local legislative body agrees to do so. And so there are a couple of ideas that do raise the bar beyond the minimum that the state sets. However, the primary purpose of what you're reading tonight is to keep pace with what the statutes have changed to. The primary piece of which is dedicated to the statutory allowance for businesses to deliver alcoholic products. And again, you probably picked up on that, and our ordinances pursuant to your approval would then be consistent with that service that is now allowable pursuant to statute. So with that, Mr. Mayor, the attorney wanted to kind of go over some of those changes with you. We would propose that this be carried forward to a reading process, and obviously with regard to the many nuances you may have seen here in your reading of this, and that your discussion will bring out, would be what it is that we need your direction on ultimately. So if I could turn the time over to John, that'd be good.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Council.
So we're going to keep the drugs, we're going to allow more alcohol. That's what's happening.
Not more, just different means.
Yeah.
You might be on point there.
Thanks for pointing out the hypocrisy.
So anyway, we are going to shift a little bit back to a substance of which we've now looked at 3 different times. I've been here 3 years, and each of the 3 years we've had a major legislative change that's required that we modify our ordinances to kind of keep up with the statutes and to be consistent with the statutes in a lot of ways. And so this one was interesting because the one that came out last year was pretty difficult. They had the manufacturers lumped in with the microbrewers, and it was difficult to read, it was difficult to understand. You'll see large swaths of the proposed ordinance that we've given to you are just redlined out because they've all been withdrawn. They tried to be put in their proper place and to separate those out. So with respect to those, if you see those, it's not because that language was necessarily bad or is being repealed. It's simply that the ability to understand the statute was not consistent with the way they were drafted. And in fact, in talking with the Liquor Division, they said that was one of their main goals this year, was to try to straighten that out because they had so many questions and people had so many concerns about whether they were actually drafting their ordinances in the proper way. So we were happy to see that. One of the questions that we've had in the past dealt with delivery from liquor operations, and there are a limited number of liquor operations, retail certainly, that can deliver now under the state statute, which we're going to be consistent with that. You look at microbreweries, wineries, and manufacturers with satellite operations, wineries with satellite operations, who will be permitted to be able to deliver alcohol. Distinction between delivery and shipping. The division, the legislature didn't want the local people in Casper to be able to deliver to Cody, so they didn't want to say, well, if you're going to do that, you're probably going to go to a shipper. That's going to happen the next day. So the requirement for delivery, the distinction is that delivery means that you have to pull it from your own inventory that day, and it has to be delivered before the end of business that day. So they think that would keep that within the community, or at least very close to the community that the liquor establishment is in. So that's the distinction the legislature made, and I think that was kind of pursuant to the request of the Liquor Division. So that is something. Delivery, though, still have requirements on it. It can't be delivered by anyone less than the age of 21. It can't be delivered to someone someone who's less than the age of 21. So you have to have basically people over the age of 21 on both ends of that delivery process. The delivery person has to be TIPS trained, and in the past, we looked at whether the delivery package was in its original packaging. Now it's sealed. So basically, which would mean either original packaging, but it can also be sealed by plastic heat process or by a delivery cap that will show if it's been altered. So there's multiple needs there. It makes it, I think, much better that they've articulated that and lets people know when they can come down and how they can comply with the law in a specified way. The one area, though, where I want you to note that we have modified somewhat was that is on page 15 of the proposed ordinance, 508-120, subparagraph 6. And basically, what we have put in here is not specified by statute, and it's kind of consistent, I think, with statute, but it's not mandated by statute. And so that liquor deliveries in Casper can only be made by licensed operations from the city of Casper. There's licensed operations that are licensed here. So you would still have some regulatory ability to make sure that those people are doing the right thing. If someone else from a different community were sending out someone with a driver that wasn't tipstream or wasn't 21 years of age, we really wouldn't have much ability to go back on those people if we're going to let it wide open. The people in the county or the people in Mills or people in Evansville, I don't want to pick on any of them because it certainly wouldn't be the communities or the county that would want to do that. But you could have a road operator in one of those jurisdictions over which we would have no authority. So we have made that, and I've talked with at least one, well, I did talk with one liquor dealer this afternoon, said he was perfectly fine with that. That most of his sales, if he's going to be delivering, are going to be here in Casper anyway. And that's where his business is, and that's where most of the population is. So I think they're probably going to be pretty happy with that. But if you get some feedback and it makes sense to you, by all means, bring it up or bring it up tonight if you don't think that makes sense. But that's one of the questions I really wanted to make sure that you knew about, because it's kind of a big thing I think a lot of people's minds. And if you were to bring in one big retailer here, an Apple Jacks or something like that, only to deliver and to have people running out and being able to deliver over a large swath of the state, because we're going to be able to have 5 or 6 delivery vans, and so 2 times a month we're going to go to Cody, we're going to head off. Right? It could happen, under the state statute right now, because they're just saying inventory, sales made, inventory out by the end of the day and delivered. So it could happen. So anyway, this kind of gives, I think, the local liquor licensees a little bit more protection in that regard, and gives, I think, the public a little more protection too, because you and the Casper Police Department will be there to make sure that things are complied with. The other relatively large one, I think, would be with the restaurant modifications. In the past, the restaurants had to have a specific dispensing room, and they had to, kind of put up a barricade of some physical structure and say, this is our room for dispensing. And people couldn't go in there who were under 21, and it cost them extra money, extra time, and operationally they had to do things. So that has now been removed. They still have the requirement to have a special area where people under 21 can't go in and be mixing drinks and that type of thing. But that is something I think they've been looking forward to. The other one, it's an odd one, because in the past ordinance, the restaurant had to be something more than just a place that served hamburgers and hot dogs, just fried food. Reference here, the archaic language was to fit on its, it's going to serve something more, a real meal. And I discussed with other council, another council here in Natrona County, that's provision at one time. I was representing a liquor dealer in a private matter before them, and that language was just kind of an odd thing, trying to have them talk around it, the city attorney talk around it, and my client talk around it. It was just gone. But now that is gone. But that also means then that things such as McDonald's or Burger King or whatever could potentially be licensed. Consistent with your ordinance about
so weird.
delivery windows, you don't permit new establishments. If you have a retail license and you have a drive-up window, we say your grandfather Dan. But what we've put in here now, at least for your consideration, is the restriction upon restaurant licenses that if you have a functional drive-up window, you don't qualify for a restaurant license. So this would in effect preclude McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's or Hardee's or whatever from having a restaurant license. So give that some thought, but that's one of those things that are out there. You may get some feedback pro or con, I don't know. But it seemed kind of consistent with the retail philosophy that we've had in the past. So certainly happy to take questions on that, maybe do some research if you feel it necessary.
Councilman McCaffrey.
Question about the tips training for the delivery person. Technically, the sale has already taken place. So all he is a go-between. So what should happen if he gets to his point of delivery and the guy can barely stand up at the door? Technically, he's already bought it. What's the
Then
guy
he's
supposed to
home.
do?
He's not driving, he's home.
Exactly. What's the guy supposed to do? So
Give it
why
to him.
do we need tips training for the delivery driver?
Well, and I suspect there's a lot of reasons. One is that you don't deliver it to someone who looks like that they're 18, even if you're going to check their licenses and make sure that they're 21 and the picture matches. So it is kind of an enforcement thing, whether it's in the bar or a restaurant or liquor store. You know, the tips training is there to be kind of the eyes and the ears for the social climate that we want to have. And one is not to permit just kind of blatant drunkenness and let people take advantage of people whose judgment has been impaired. And so I think probably the way I would view it, and certainly if the chief has any different ideas, but if you get there and the person is obviously intoxicated and really, shouldn't be drinking this, I mean, if they fall down and they vomit while they're on their back, they're going to die. Now, this is just one of those unfortunate facts of drinking too much. And you get people in their houses, and if they're consuming too much, we're just saying, hey, look, take a break. We're at least not going to deliver it to your very door so you can basically do it yourself, and you have to send the EMTs out or whatever else. So you turn around, you go back, you credit their credit card because that's how they have to pay. And you wait for them to call back when they're more so the next day or 2 days down, would be my thought process on it. But I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Because as a follow-up, and not literally, but I can see messengers getting killed because you kill the messenger on telephone calls, on everything else when you don't get what you want, and it's no fault of the messenger. And you're putting that messenger in a heck of a spot when he goes up and tries to tell a drunk standing in his doorway that I'm not going to give it to you when he thinks he's already paid for it.
That could be a problem, certainly for these people. They probably need to know that. And it's probably another good idea that we should be telling the tip trainers that they need to have this particular concern addressed, because I don't think that would be a concern that would be addressed in the tips training that we get currently. So that's not a bad idea, but you're exactly right. The people, you ordered it, you got my money, I'll be darned if you're not going to give me that bottle of beer or whatever. So a good thought.
Your thoughts, Chief? If that's okay.
Yeah.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the observations. Remember, tips training is designed to accomplish a bunch of tasks. One is the responsible serving, to make sure that we're not showing up at Mrs. Goldstein's house, but only finding 15-year-olds, 30 or 40 of them. We would not want that transaction to occur. As far as the laws that govern the sell and delivery of alcohol, and when I say delivery, the actual taking it from my hand to yours, that's all governed by tips. So in this case, the sell, the transaction that was conducted online or over the phone, is only one part of it, but that actual delivery, the actual my hands to yours, is actually controlled also, and we definitely want them to have the training to make sure that it's in everybody's best interest that we proceed further. As far as when it comes to safety, there's the DoorDash people, the Uber drivers. I mean, the world is full of what ifs, You know, and you know, I would submit to you that those problem addresses will get a reputation pretty fast, and just not, you know, our local establishments just wouldn't do business with them. So, you know, we can't guarantee every citizen's safety today. Heaven knows I would like to try, but I can't do that. But the tips training is a critical aspect of it. You know, for sure, I would want people to know what they're doing and why they're doing it, if they're going to engage in this type of commerce.
Councilman Gamble.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Henley. I know we're not the first community to grapple with this in our state, and especially across the country, and so I was just curious, in the research, if we did any on this, especially in regards to, like, you mentioned the McDonald's, like, you know, adding that piece of it to keep those guys out of it as far as having an established drive-through window. Is that idea and other ideas that the legislature at the state level used and that we're using here derived from maybe successful you know, programs in other communities that maybe got something like this going last summer and have had, you know, a good 6 to 8 months of kind of results to be able to inform?
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but it was one of the things that the division did put out there. That, look, we're going to broaden this up. This means this is one of those questions that may come to you as a municipality or as a governmental entity, county, and so therefore, you know, you're advised, you know, deal with it up front as you want to. Now, maybe there have been some where that's happened. I think in other jurisdictions you might see that, where, not in Wyoming, I've never heard of a McDonald's or a Burger King doing that. And I imagine some certain franchises would allow that. Certainly Chick-fil-A wouldn't allow it or something like that. But I suspect a lot of franchises aren't going to do that. And you know, particularly, I like to think if they can serve it, they're not going to serve it, and they shouldn't serve it under our current laws in any event, out the window. But again, just to be consistent with a drive-up way to dispense product, that would be a concern. And so that would at least bring back the thought process that I was going through when I was saying, let's put this out there and you guys can decide what to do with it.
Follow, if I could. I've fielded several phone calls from individuals in the community that we have several local food delivery options, and so they would obviously like to see those guys succeed more than like an Uber or DoorDash or something. Are we able to, and or do you see any reasons why we would not codify language, you know, can you make a preference for local over corporate or anything? That's what I figured.
Free market.
Okay, that's what I figured. Got several phone calls from people, and so I just wanted to confirm that. But
Sure. Yeah, I think probably there's some liquor dealers who probably just take deliveries on their way home to their neighbors, you know.
Mhm.
Hey, Joe, I need a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon tonight or whatever.
Mhm.
Could you bring it home when you're coming home for dinner? Something like that. So basically at restaurants, then we talked about delivery, we talked about restaurants a little bit. Two other things I'd really like to bring to your attention though, because I'd like your permission to put them in the draft ordinance if you decide to give this a thumbs up and you want to continue the process. And one would be with special malt beverage permits. Remember, special malt beverage permits are for public auditorium, civic centers, event centers, any places with over 400 people. And in the past, we had the fee for that at $1,000 a year. And you know, it's a bigger venue, and you know, the thought process was you might get David Street Station to want to have one of those, and they could just do that instead of coming down and getting a malt beverage permit every week or every other week or whatever. So in the proposed ordinance that you have before you now, we said $250 a day would be the charge for this, because again, it's the bigger venue, thinking that maybe that would be more appropriate than just the $50 charge, which you would get if you were to go set up a booth you know, up in the park, and you have a family gathering up there and you wanted to have some friends or something over, and so you were serving beer at your house or whatever. You had to have a malt beverage permit or a catering permit for that type of thing. But in looking at it, it seems like that is probably, you know, probably not a lot of demand for that. So I would like to suggest to you that we put in there, at least for your consideration, maybe public comment. One, keep the $1,000 per year in there as an option, but then maybe, put in a fee for the daily use if the owner, whether it be the county or the city or David Street Station wanted to do it, and basically just make that, either the 50, which is the same as the malt beverage permit, the usual one, or 75 if you wanted to raise it a little bit, because it was a bigger, more public venue, so in theory have more value. So if you wouldn't mind, and we were thinking about giving the thumbs up or thumbs down on this, if we could address that specifically, I'd like to do that. And then the other one I hope to address specifically is that, something I thought that we had done, the beer keg. It's one of those things that you have special requirements for a beer keg. You go get a beer keg, you have to sign some forms and say who you are, what you're doing with it, that type of thing. And the states has always mandated that. And in the past, we've said, hey, look, you just maintain a copy of what you provided to the state so that if our police department wants to use it, it's available to them. The state has now repealed that, and so under the new statute. So I'm thinking, let's just take this and we'll just do away with this particular section of the agreements as well. And talking about a liquor dealer today, they said, in all of the years that I've been doing this and doing this paperwork, I've never been requested once for the 35 years that I've been in business. So with your permission, and again, the thumbs up, if you're okay with that, I'd make those two changes to you for your consideration on your first reading and the first public hearing on this matter.
Okay, and then John, what do we have on limo exemption?
The limo exemption is a question to you. We don't have anything right now. The question came up, and I think it was two, maybe 3 councils ago, 2 councils for sure, is that right now we cannot have alcohol served in limos under the city ordinance. State statute would permit that, but our ordinance is more confining with that. And so the question is, do you want to kind of let the exception go along with the state statute and let limousine drivers basically carry parties around, or a couple around, or going to their anniversary or celebrating a wedding or something like that. And if they want to have a bottle of champagne, that's okay. It's not an open container violation. That's what we're talking about here, is basically an open container violation or not. And in talking with the chief, he says, really, as long as the driver of the compartment in a limousine, it's a big enough thing, it's a special kind of an event, that doesn't bother him. Really pretty ambivalent whether we do or we don't. The thought process, if it's an Uber driver though, or a taxi cab driver, those are just so routine and the like, we would not want to do that. So it'd be just limited. If you want to do it, I think that the police department, would say, whatever your preference is, if we can just kind of limit it to limousines or some type of a larger, we'll have to look to see how that's defined. But that's it. It's really just basically a philosophical decision that we'd like you to make, and then we can draft something up for that.
Okay. So as far as the liquor ordinance changes, are we good with that, or any more discussion on that portion of it? All right, and then what about limo exemption?
Sorry, maybe just point of clarification. At that point, then, would the limo drivers be required to have tips training? Because in theory, they're the dispenser, right?
They are.
Is the ones driving it. So, in order, I feel like, to be consistent with the other things that we're doing, we would ask the limo drivers to have tips training then, correct?
I think you'd be correct.
Okay.
But I see the chief standing up.
You saw the chief jump up at us. Mayor, if I may, please. Excellent question. For clarification, under the example that he just gave, if John and his wife were wanting to go out to the hangar for their anniversary dinner, and he wanted to have a romantic night and hired a limousine, and brought with him a bottle of champagne from his house and opened it, the limo driver would not be providing that.
Okay.
So it would be a temporary he's hired that space. It's almost become like a motel room to him, and I wouldn't regulate him. I wouldn't stop him from getting a hotel room with his wife and having champagne there. So the problem that I have is, if this is happening right now in our county, the limo picks them up out at the hangar and starts to come back in. Right up until they hit the city line, they can be consuming alcohol in the back, and the driver should not be delivering them unless he has a liquor license. You know, so that's the
Okay.
point I want to make.
Okay.
Unless he's got a retail license or you know a special permit, he can't do that. This is their own thing because they've hired this temporary conveyance that's kind of become their residence on wheels for a short amount of time. So I'm uncomfortable. What I would recommend to this council is I'm uncomfortable for something that 6 feet over there is legal, but over here it's not. And you know, what's the driver? We're putting those drivers in a predicament. Hey, I need to pull over until you know it. So I'm not advocating one way or the other, but this is a discrepancy where right now, if this were to occur, you know, a motor coach, you know, if you hired a group to take you and your 40th anniversary classmates to the casino, and they had a liquor license. Everybody on the bus and the driver are going to get in trouble in Casper, but over our city line they're not. And so for these commercial conveyances, you know, where you've got a, you know, this is a hired arrangement, not a taxi driver, not an Uber driver. You know, most jurisdictions have this exemption carved out in there. And indeed, our state statutes allow for this. And so it's just one of the areas we're pointing out where we're not compliant, and I think it puts people in a bad light. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but if we're cleaning up discrepancies, it's not fair to, you know, the limo drivers. You know, not that we have an abundance of limo drivers, but given if we were to make this available, somebody may say, hey, that's going to increase business, so yeah, I'm going to be a limo driver. You know, but they've got that whole back compartment, and the spirit of the law is intended to not have drunken driving. So, you know, the limo driver should never be procuring and providing.
Yeah, okay.
It's just this temporary, hey, when you're in the back and I'm driving and I'm separate from this, then you're not going to be, you know, you're not going to be in violation, and I'm not. Because right now, if we pulled over the limo today, everybody in the back and the limo driver, and he's going to be like, man, I had no idea the window was rolled up, and you know, so it's just a discrepancy, and that's our goal, is to just keep fine-tuning our ordinances to make sure that we're adherent to council's goals for our public safety issues. You know, so we were just bringing this to your attention. This is another discrepancy. If you want to act on it, we have some recommendations for you. If you're good with the way it is, that's working also.
Limo exemption.
No exemption.
Okay, you bet.
The proposed changes all okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right.
Rickshaw exemption. Rickshaw
Oh
exemption.
God, here we go. Scooters?
Scooters, they're all.
Agenda review, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to draw your attention to a few items here in upcoming meetings for the meeting of the 6th. We do have a pre-meeting item dedicated to the 5-year strategic plan for MPO. That is kind of a federal requirement, if you will, to go over with you. We also have the engagement letter we'd like to review with you as it relates to our auditors, which we haven't always done, but it makes sense that we take those steps with you, particularly given some of our concerns with our audit and all that kind of thing. We will be having an executive session that evening related to security. Switching attention here to the meeting of the 13th, which is a work session. You can see the items dedicated there for that meeting. We probably need to have a conversation as well about scooters. It just so happens in that we are likely going to need some ordinance changes to accommodate that service in this community if you so desire to go down that road. So those conversations would need to be happen if John, you think we could be ready by then?
I think so.
Okay. So that's probably one I would add there. And I would likely take off the tentative status, if you will, on that GIS demo, in that the LGBTQ Advisory Committee did ask to speak to the council. We're proposing that the 27th is that time frame, if that's okay with all of you, which would mean that we would likely not want to do the GIS demo on that evening, but rather an earlier evening in the month, if that's
Yep.
appropriate for your purposes. The other item that we need to cover on the night of the 27th is with respect to a cooperative agreement that we would want to engage White-On in, wherein we have the opportunity to consider some context-sensitive amenities in conjunction with a number of projects that White-On is conducting along the I-25 corridor. And so I was going to get Andrew to discuss those with you and get your blessing or direction or whatever it is that you would see fit to provide. As is typical for this part of our agenda, I would also want to direct your attention to future topics, in that if you see things that need to be added to this list, this would be the time to propose that. And beyond that, Mr. Mayor, that's what I would bring forward for the agenda review.
On the 27th, the advisory committee, are we also going to cover the safe places?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's a great idea. We did have that discussion this past week with the committee, and you may be appreciative of some of those updates as well. So that would be a great time to do that.
That's a good update.
Yep.
You else got anything? No? Okay, move on to legislative review. City manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know that I have anything particularly unique for tonight to bring up, and so I don't know that I don't think I have anything to report.
Okay. All right. Council round table. Councilmember Pollock.
Had an EDJPB meeting this morning, and we approved a budget. That's about all I have.
Same time.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And budget amendments.
And some amendments to close out the last budget. So yeah, similar process to what we just did here. So yeah, if anybody's interested in that, we've got that budget ready to roll.
Councilwoman Lutz.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Kathy.
The CPU meeting scheduled for in the morning has been canceled. So, great time at the rodeos. And for those of you that weren't there Saturday night, was anybody here Saturday night? Or there Saturday night?
Yep.
Okay. Basically, you all know who Jet Johnson?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He is the coach at Casper College. His two boys, riding for Casper College, won the team roping event, and that whole arena erupted when that happened. So one of them quoted as saying, "Didn't even have to look at the scorecard. We knew by the crowd that we had won." So yeah, that was a very good moment for Casper.
You knew by then, because I was sitting like right there when they realized they won that thing, and you wanted to just jump up and jump in the arena and celebrate with them. They were so happy. So.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. All of those young people they're quite a set of young people.
Councilwoman Ingresson.
I have nothing tonight, thanks.
Councilman Johnson.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Gamble.
I've said enough.
Yeah. No, anything tonight.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No, I'm serious.
You can talk.
No,
You need
I
some
don't have
water.
no. Just ready to go, I guess.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
Yeah, I had a good meeting on Friday at LGBTQ. They will be doing a full update on the 27th, so I'll hold off on that and let them do the updating on a safe place and everything else. So it's really good. I think it'd be good for Casper. So kind of leave it a little bit at that, and that's all I have.
Okay. I'm going to add on to CNFR. So Saturday night, we were 224 seats shy of a sold-out crowd.
Wow.
That place was packed, and couldn't find a place to park to save your life out there. And I think our best year was 265,000 in revenue, and we were $100 shy of 307,000. So we absolutely just crushed it this year, and just a ton of people out there enjoying it. And it was a great event. So
Along those same lines, I think they said ticket sales were up 20% over 19.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, it was a good year, very good year. So, 2 more months, we'll start planning all over again. All right, that's all I've got, so. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Rickshaw ordinances, yep.